Okay, and before we move on, let's have a very quick review about the functions we have already learned. Well, for the function, to define that, we have to use the keyword def for define, right? So we define, and then after def, and then we have to specify the function name, and then a pair of parentheses. And in the parentheses, we can put as many arguments as we want to. Well, if there's no arguments at all, and then it's just a pair of empty parentheses, and then we have a colon. After the colon, and everything indented here will be considered as the body of the function. So whenever this function is called, and then the body will be executed, right? And eventually at the very end, usually we have a return. So return means, well, whatever we want the value to be returned, and it will send back to the caller. Okay, so this is the general structure of a function definition. And here is an example. So well, if we want to define a function called add, and then we take two parameters, x and y, and then I'm just gonna add x and y together, assign that to value, and then I'm gonna return the value. Okay, so when I'm defining this function, one point I want to remind you guys is, well, if we don't have any color yet, just by defining this function, and then this will serve as a general purpose function. So no matter what will be the two parameters, I take them, and then I'm going to add them together, and then I'm going to return the sum, right? So well, this function is supposed to be general purpose. Well, it doesn't work only for specific values, and even it doesn't works it doesn't work only for the specific data types. Well, here's an interesting example. If I'm sending x and y as two integers, does that work? It works, right? If I'm sending x and y as two float numbers, does this function work? This function works. And an interesting example is this. So if I'm sending two strings, does this function work? Well, actually, this function also works. So the reason is, well, if I'm having the x as a string and y as a string, and then x plus y, what is that? That is a string concatenation, right? So, and then I'm going to return the concatenated strings. So it also works. So, and the point I'm trying to make is functions are typeless. By saying it is typeless, it means that, well, we didn't sign a contract saying for the parameter x and y they have to be a specific data type, and for the return values we also tell you it has to be a specific data type. We don't say that. We don't do that in Python. Okay, and here is another example. Here is another breakdown of the function definition. We have the keyword def as the definition, and then function name and parentheses, and that is a parameter or argument. And after that, if you want to, it's always a good practice to have a documentation string and saying what is the input, what is the output, and then, well, this is the body is indented, and eventually we have a color, right? So this function is called isEven, and it takes a I, and if you return either a true or a false, and then this color is even with the parameter as a 3. So 3 will be sent to this function, and then 3 will be the value of the I, and then we will go through the body of this function. Okay, and then the next topic, that is really challenging, or I would say annoying when I learned Python originally. Okay, that's the rule of the namespace. So, well, what is namespace? Namespace is the scope or the range of a name where the name stays live or stays valid. Okay, and then there are two types of the variable names when we are talking about the functions. One is global variable name and another one is local variable name. And the rule is, if we have a variable name defined inside a function definition, and this variable name can only be seen inside a function definition. And for the name, because that name is called a local variable name. And for the name defined inside a function definition, it does not clash with the variables defined outside the function definition. So this means you can actually have one global variable name, another local variable name, and they are exactly the same. This is confusing, but in Python, this is supported. Okay, and another thing, another two concepts I want to talk about are one, formal parameter, and two, actual parameter. We have seen this before. So for the formal parameter, it means that when I'm defining a function, I'm just say, define a cube, and then for the cube function, I'm taking a parameter x, and then I'm returning x cube, right? So what will this x be? It can be 0, it can be 10, it can be 15, I don't know. But no matter which value I'm taking as the x, this function will always return the x cube. It doesn't really matter what kind of value it is. As long as I'm taking a x value and then I'm trying to return the x cube. Right? So this x is the formal parameter. I don't know what type of what value it is, but I'm defining this function using the variable name x. So that is the formal parameter. And then the actual parameter will be in the caller. So when I'm calling the cube function, I'm sending the 7, right? So this 7 is the actual parameter. That is the parameter I'm sending to the function. So 7 will be the x. So in this case, 7 is the actual parameter, the actual value I'm calling with the function call. And then for the x, that is the formal parameter. I define the function with the formal parameter, but when I'm calling the function, I have to use a actual parameter. In this case, that's 7. Okay, and now we are seeing some of the really tricky part. So we have the df fx. So this x is defined inside the function definition, right? So this x is a local variable. It is also a formal parameter. And then I do x equals x plus 1. I print the x and then I return the x. So, there's nothing special. But the tricky thing is here. Outside, I have another x. And is this x a local variable name or a global variable name? This x is a global variable name because it is defined outside the function definition, right? So this x is a global variable name, and then I also have another x, which is a local variable name. So let's come back to this part. So names defined inside the definition do not clash with a variable outside the definition, even if the same name is used elsewhere. Okay, so in this case, I have a local variable name x and I also have a global variable name x. Is that okay in Python? The answer is okay. They do not crash. Okay, so I have the global variable name x is 3, and then I'm sending x as the actual parameter because x is 3 here. So I'm sending 3 to the function call. And inside the function call, I have another x, but this x is a local variable name. So when this function is called, and then 3 will be sent here. So there's no clash in this function. So everything's good. And in this part, I want to break down this code a little bit more and tell you how it works. So when we have this this part executed, and then in the global scope, and then we have a function definition. So we have f as in the global scope, and then this f is the name of a function. It refers to some part of the code that is the body of the function. And then we also have the x defined. X is a global variable, and that is 3, right? And then I'm having a z, and z will be the return value of this function cal. So far I don't have that yet. So I have the global variable named z, but I don't have the value yet. And then when this function is called, and then in the local scope, okay, so this is the local scope, I have another variable named x, and this x is the local variable name, and then x will be 3. And after that, x equals x plus 1, and then x will be 4. Okay, and then let's move on. We will print the value of the x, and then we will also return the x value. So eventually, this 4 will be returned to the variable named z. So z will also have the 4. Okay, so this is how a variable z is returned. And let me ask you this. So when we are here, when we are at this line, we eventually got the value of the z. And then is the local scope, the local function scope, still there, still available? The answer is no. Well, because we have finished the function cal, and then whatever inside the local scope will no longer be accessible after here. Okay, so we make the function cal, we send the actual parameter, and then we got the return value, and then the local scope will be killed. And then from now on, we are staying at the global scope. And even though we make another function cal, and then the former local scope will be erased or purged by Python. Okay? So well, here are some of the more accessibility rules of the variables. So inside the function, we can access a variable defined outside. So inside a function, we can still have access to a global variable name. And if a variable name is defined twice, well, one at the global and one in the local. And inside the function, the local one will be used. Well, let me write a piece of code and show you what it means. Say I want to take down this line of code, and then I'm defining a print function, and then I'm taking the variable a and b. Okay, and then I'm gonna print a, and I'm gonna do a print b, and then I'm not returning anything. So for this function, I'm taking two parameters, one parameter called a, another parameter called b, right? And then I'm doing nothing else. I'm just printing the a and b. Okay, and then inside this function, well, outside this function, I'm defining a string a called is hello, and string b is word. Okay, and then I'm calling this function with string a, comma, string b. Okay, so if I'm running this code, and then you will see hello and word being printed, because in this case, string a and string b, they are two actual parameters, and then for a and b, they are two formal parameters, right? So far that's good. Okay, and then, well, let me make a little change here. So instead of sending the a and b as two parameters, now I'm not sending any parameters. If I'm making this change and inside this function, well, it will say, well, this function doesn't know what are a and b, right? But now, okay, let me change it to string a and string b. Okay, so this function, it doesn't take any parameter. And then inside this function cal, I'm trying to print the string a and string b. And what are string a and string b? They are two global variable names, but I'm printing that inside a function, right? So let me try to run this and see if it works. Okay, So it works. So inside a function, I have access to the variables defined in the global scope. Is that correct? Okay. So, well, now let me purge this part, and then I'm going to try to do something else. So I'm going to define another function called defining strings. And then I'm defining string A as hello and string B as word. Okay, and outside this function, I want to call this defining strings first, and then I want to print string A, and then I want to print string B. Okay, so well, I'm just using this function to define two variables for me. And then after calling this function, I'm assuming there are string A and string B being defined. So I should be able to call string A and string B. So well, even without running this code, I see Python doesn't like that, right? And let me run this code. And then it's tell me a name error saying name string A is not defined on line 6, which is here. So what's the problem in this code? I'm defining two variables inside a function. And outside this function, those two names are not available, right? So in this function call, I'm defining those two variables in the local scope. However, string A and string B, they are local variable names. They are not available in the global scope. So that's the reason this function doesn't work. Okay, so if you want to have access to string A and string B, you have to define them in the global scope. Okay, and the code inside a function cannot modify a variable defined outside, and we talk about that in a early example. Okay, so well, here are a few more examples. So here I have a define a function A. So this is function. It takes a parameter A, and then I'm printing inside function A and printing hello string A. So what is hello string? I don't have hello string defined in the local scope, right? So it has to be a global variable name to make the function work. And then how about A? I do have A. A is a local variable name. Okay, so now in this function, I'm printing a global variable name plus a local variable name. Okay, and then I'm defining the hello string outside. This is a global variable name. And then I have a number, and then I'm calling the function, and then I'm calling the function with the number, which is 10. I'm making another function call, which is 99. Okay, the tricky part is inside this function, I have a global variable name and then a local variable name. Since this global variable name has been defined, this part of the code is okay. And let's do something else. Well, this is still a function A, and then I'm trying to define a variable called number. And this number is A multiplied by 2. So I have a variable called number here, right? And then outside, in the global scope, I have another variable, which is 10. Okay, so for this part, when I'm calling when I'm sending the number, which is 10, into this function, and then the number will be A multiplied by 2, which is 20. So that's the interesting thing. Inside of this function, I have the number to be 20. That is a local variable name number. And then in the global scope, I do have another variable name called number, and that number is 10. Is there a clash? The answer is no, because this is a local variable name and this one is a global variable name. So even though we are having two variable names called number, that's okay. And interesting thing happened here too. So at here, when I'm printing the hello string, no problem. That is a global variable name. Printing a, no problem, and that is a local variable name. And how about this number? I have two variables called number, right? One is a local variable name and another one is global variable name. So when I'm printing the number in the function, which number will be used? So let me come back. So well, inside the function, the local one will be used. So even though there are two variable names called number, when I'm using the variable name number in the function, the local one will be used. So in this case, when I'm printing this number, I'm printing the local number, not the global number. So I'm printing 20 here, which is here. Okay, so this part is definitely confusing. Well, and I can help you write another piece of the code. So define a really strange function. Okay, and then I'm going to do a equals 10 and then print a. And then this is a local variable named a, right? And in the global scope, let me define a to be 11. And then I'm trying to make a function call of the strange function. And then, well, there's a global variable named a, which is 11, and in the local scope, there's another a, which is 10. So when I'm printing the a inside the function, which one am I going to have? I'm going to have the local variable, which is 10. So I'm printing 10 here. Okay. Well, but in the global scope, if I'm doing another print, so I'm saying global print a, comma a, and in this case, well, I'm making two prints. In the local scope, I'm printing the local variable, which is 10. And in the global scope, I'm outside the function, so I'm printing the global variable name a. Why? Because the local variable a is not really accessible because I'm here in the global scope. So that a is the only a accessible here. So I'm printing 11. Okay? So here is one more thing. Well, if there's no return statement, and by default, Python will return you a none. Okay? Well, if you are here and you know some Ruby, and in Ruby the rule is different. Well, for this example, the last line of the code will be processed, no problem. And then since there's no return value, and then the return value by default will be a none. So be careful about this in Python. And after today's lecture, and you can move on and do the part 10 of the CI circle, and there will be another video talking about the daily exercise for day 8.